Joining us, we've got excited about this group of folks and this panel we brought together here. We are looking at, we've been talking about a lot of these things all week long, and I think this group of folks we've got up here can shed a lot of light on not just the problems and issues that we've got here, but where they are projecting out, where some of the solutions might be coming from. So I'm going to ask each of the panel members to do a kind of a quick 5-minute introduction with some opening statements, and I'm going to start with Carl.
Okay, so my name's Carl Seilstad. I'm on the faculty at the University of Montana, a typical, I guess, faculty member. I teach classes, I have graduate students, I have a research program. I came up through the fire ranks. I'm still a practicing ICT3. I do a fair amount, a couple of assignments a summer, mostly in the Northern Rockies, and mostly related to, I guess, what I consider resource benefit type of fire. In 2014, I delivered a paper at the AFE-IAWF Large Fire Conference in Missoula, and that paper was really, it wasn't necessarily a call for action, but it was really sort of a, hey, we've had this change in policy and our fire use program has changed. Where are we at? Are we making progress? Have we regressed? And I tried to be provocative and lay out some things that I thought that we could take a look at moving forward. And I think now, 2 years from that moment, that it's still not certain to me where we're at with sort of fire use or fire for resource benefit. I guess I agree with Frankie that there's a lot of activity out there, and there's a lot of good resource benefit, managing fire for resource benefit going on out there. But it's really difficult to say how much and where, because we're lacking some tracking mechanisms and some other things. So I think a lot of the issues we've talked about over the course of this conference, I wanted to highlight a few. One of the things I had said in 2014 is, hey, maybe we dissolved this fire use community too fast, and maybe we need to take a look at bringing it back together. And I regret to say I don't know that I believe that necessarily, but I'm not ready to abandon it yet either. So if I look back to the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, which to me was really the halcyon days of fire use, we had 9 fire use management teams that got a lot of use, good teams. We had 30 wildland fire use modules that were active, that were organized. There was cohesion between the Park Service and the Forest Service. And in my mind, a lot of that sort of cohesion and energy has disappeared, perhaps replaced by similar energy, distributed energy on different landscapes, and that we're accomplishing the same kinds of things, or maybe more substantial accomplishments, but we just don't track them and know about them as well. But as I think about bringing back these resources, I think, well, we kind of have one fire use team now. That's Diane Hutton's team, right? And Diane Hutton's team got one assignment this summer, and it was an important assignment, but it was one assignment. Similar last year, and so I think, well, do we need fire use teams? No, we're not using the team that we've got very effectively, to be honest with you, for fire use. So it raises an interesting question to me, which is, who's doing all the fire use management now that the teams are gone and we're not really using and exploiting the team that we've got? And I think that one answer to that question is, it's people like me that are invited to manage fires locally around Missoula that are doing a lot of sort of fire use-y stuff, but we're not connected to all of the other entities that are doing similar stuff in other parts of the country. Let me make 3 more points. I feel like that, well, I think there's evidence for that our fire use modules, that wildland fire modules, are still in a bit of disarray. Certainly on the Forest Service side, modules come, modules go, and the modules that I see that are really useful in a fire use context are really sustained by the energy of the individuals, the leadership of the individuals who are on those modules. I think our resource benefit we're doing a lot of it, but it's largely gone underground. I know a lot of the work that I do in the Northern Rockies really doesn't see the light of day in terms of substantial public information. It's cool resource benefit projects that are kind of tucked away, and there isn't the same sort of motivation that there was to advertise and announce and indicate what we're doing. And then the last thing that I see is I see this at the University of Montana. I've talked to other faculty in other places too, that my students aren't as excited 5 or 6 years ago. And this isn't necessarily a fire use problem, but 5 or 6, 5 to 10 years ago, the majority of students that I interacted with saw fire as an opportunity. And they really looked at fire as cool because there was a career opportunity, and there was work, and it was exciting, but also they felt like that they could change things. And one of the places that students were really responded well was in this sort of fire use change. It was exciting, people saw opportunity. Maybe it was a little snobby, where students thought, well, we're educated and this is a little smarter way of doing business. And I've seen an erosion of that at the University of Montana, where now, actually, amongst our forestry students, fire is considered something that you do in the summer, like we used to have some fun, but it isn't widely viewed as, there's sort of widespread cynicism about what's going on in fire and about opportunities in fire. And so I guess the 4 items, we distributed fire use, it's kind of underground, we don't have strong sort of structure in our modules, and then I see students that are sort of making different choices than they used to with regard to fire as being potential watch-outs for how our resource benefit program is evolving and should evolve going forward.
Okay, thanks, Carl. So we'll pass it on, and I will ask the panelists, it can fade out in the back, so if you can use the microphone, please. So, Bill Kaage.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Kaage. I'm the Chief of Fire and Aviation for the National Park Service. I'm not the fire director. Dan Buckley's the fire director, so I supervise Dan. But I've been in my job, or his job, since about '09, so I've got a little bit of historical perspective on what happened within the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, WCG, with planning, that I thought worthwhile to go over to explain where we were in 2010 and where we are now in 2016, 2017. So at that time I was on NWCG, and I was the chair 9, 10, or 10, 11, something like that, of NWCG, and we started having discussions about incident management, succession planning, and we actually chartered a group that was led by Sue Hasari and Pam. I forget Pam's last name from the Fish and Wildlife Service. Inslee, yeah, Pam Inslee. And we tasked them with conducting an analysis based upon data across the country, what was the number of teams we could sustain, given the trajectory we saw with decreasing capability of incident management. And there was a whole slew of recommendations that came out of that phase 1 work called incident management organization succession planning, IMOSP, for some of you who may remember that. And they came up with 40 teams, nationally led teams, and there was a slew of recommendations associated with it. And we took that in NWCG and we formulated a strategic implementation plan. Taking those recommendations, how would we actually operationalize them, execute them? And that was from about 10 to 12, and Evans Quo led that effort for NWCG. And I would say that out of those multitude of recommendations that were driven from the analysis, the vast majority of them have been completed by now. I know I'd struggle, frankly, to say if it was 80% complete. Certainly up in that realm, and what's left are all the tough things to do, mostly associated with internal change within bureaus and how they award successful risk management for line officers, something that came up earlier today. And about that time that second phase was done, we got into what I characterize as intergovernmental hell. Where how we operate collectively on an interagency basis changed, and a fire management board was created because NWCG was seen as making decisions, and they couldn't make decisions based upon the Federal Advisory Committee Act. And there was people on NWCG, state reps, Intertribal Timber Council, who we couldn't make decisions in NWCG. And so they created the fire management board. So now there's 3 entities that are actively engaged within we now call it incident management succession planning. And you have NWCG, handle standards and guidance, so they do a lot of work with qualifications, et cetera. There's work still associated with incident management succession planning that's ongoing within NWCG and its committees. NMAC, which is the group that really operationalizes a lot of the standards and the policy. So you get fire season, NMAC, the coordinating groups, the multi-agency coordinating groups at the regional level, geographic level, they kick into gear, and their people either on those coordinating groups or on their committees are actively involved with succession planning. And then the Fire Management Board, who handles more of the policy end of things, we are as well. So we started a couple months ago, and we picked it up in the October meeting. I don't think we're going to have a December meeting because of just timeframes. No one really meets in December because of use or lose. In January, we thought 40 teams. Teams have decreased in number, but are the teams that exist, what's their capability like to really respond to the type of fires we're talking about? You know, that were fires that achieve resource benefit. And do we need to look at institutionalizing, operationalizing something along the order of short teams like Diane's team? And I don't know where we're going to sit on that, where it's going to come out. It's still a point of discussion. The form follows function, and we'll have to see where it goes over time. But we are starting to actively talk about it again because we realize the impacts on what we set out to do may not be what we're actually doing over time. Tim.
And so I'll just throw in, so Tim also, like I was doing, standing in for Bill Hahnenberg, and with his background in incident command and now area command, so. Tim.
So as Frankie indicated, I'm an area commander currently, have been a Type 1, Type 2 IC. I've served as incident commander of fire use management teams in the past, and have retrofitted the Type 2 and Type 1 teams that I manage to accomplish beneficial use of fire. The last two large fires I managed as a Type 1 IC, although we weren't allowed to establish resource benefits as objectives, the Valley Road fire in Idaho near Ketchum, about 40,000 acres, most of it in beetle kill lodgepole. We did point protection and partial perimeter containment on the west flank that bordered homes and businesses and major roads, and on the south, north, and east flanks allowed the fire to run up into the wilderness. Out of 78 miles of perimeter, we put in 23 miles of fire line. On the Dameron fire that same year, 2005, in southern Utah, we did a similar thing of putting a horseshoe around the southwest and east flanks of the fire and allowed it to run into the, I think, Valley Park wilderness near Dixie. Both fires, my biggest struggle was not with the team, not with obtaining the necessary LTANs and FBANs. One of them I actually used Gary Cohn's fire use management team, incorporated them wholly into my Type 1 team to do some long-range planning. The other fire I used LTANs to provide assistance to the planning. But the biggest struggle was convincing the forest supervisors that I didn't need to put a line around the entire fire. And usually it's just the opposite. The forest supervisor has struggles getting the team to not do things. So the take-home message there is that any one of these teams can do the job, but you need the right people to lead those teams, and the teams need to have the right attitude. I guess I'll turn that over to Bill.
Well, my name's Bill Van Bruggen. I was here Tuesday, for those of you who are here, but I'm the fire director in Region 3. And, you know, I reported out that day that we had a really good year last year with, I'm just going to call it green fire for the sake of the discussion this morning. Which I was, you know, I'm trying to get through Stephen Pine's book, and I saw him use that term in the text there, and I thought No, I can, that's in 5 words or less, like I said. What our intent is, right? And that's really what we're trying to describe in a very simple way, although I agree with everything that was said even this morning about being much more specific about what we're actually trying to do in the landscape on any given fire. But anyway, so we had this great year last year in the Southwest. 10 of 11 forests had green fire. And the one that didn't, the Prescott, is in a complicated landscape with a lot of community intermix and has, few opportunities to begin with. But boy, when they do, they get fired up. And those fire sizes on those 10 forests varied from 500 acres up to 40,000 plus in a couple cases. And all equally as important to me. The 500 acre fire was on the Carson National Forest, which has more ecosystem that's in a stand replacing fire regime. So, when you have fire there, it goes big in a hurry, and it's supposed to. But, it's hard to manage a lot of acres of that kind of stuff around communities. So, anyway, even that 500 acre fire was a success, in my opinion. And it had been a while since that forest had managed a fire with resource objectives like that and getting community support. And if any of you have been in northern New Mexico, that isn't always an easy thing to get with long-standing generations of families that have lived there and were there long before the Forest Service was there. And then we had, a couple other fires that I just want to mention that had some uniqueness to it. The Tonto National Forest had a 40,000 acre fire that, the more experienced firefighters were sharing stories of fighting fire on that same ground, being asked to go in places and keeping the fire size to a minimum for really no apparent reason. Nothing was threatened, but this was just the past history of how they managed fires on the Tonto. And out in the middle of nowhere, really not threatening anything, and I'm very proud of the unit there in the way they looked at things. Maybe the only thing that they got into was this interesting discussion about, so they used their local incident management organization, which was a type 3 organization, and after a while they were getting into the numbers where, for my chair sitting in the regional office, it was clear to me that it was type 2 complexity, so the next higher level. And they were doing fine, as the force supervisor was talking to me about this, but had something negative happened or tragic happened, which happens when we manage fires at times. There's a certain element of uncertainty in the system, that had been hanging out a lot. So we had this discussion about type 3 teams versus type 2s, and type 2s bringing 56 people or whatever they bring normally. And it's caused me to really think moving forward about this form follows function thing that Bill brought up, really revisiting whether we need to reconfigure a little bit if we're going to do more of this, which we definitely want to do. We don't always have the kinds of years where we can do this, but I expect that with the intent from the regional forester to feel more licensed as a district ranger or forest supervisor to manage fires in this manner, that we'll see more of this, and that's a good thing. We need more fire in the landscape. We're getting more fire in the landscape, with human-caused fires too. We can't take the credit for it as in our current system, but even in those, there's many times positive outcomes. But to introduce more fire in the landscape is going to take quite a bit of wherewithal. I mentioned last year that if our average is around 1 million acres that we should be burning when you average all of our different fire regimes in the Southwest, maybe the only one that's not in that is what you're sitting in today in the Sonoran Desert, which normally doesn't see fire. But we have we have over 20 million acres of ecosystem that needs fire at one interval or another. And to do that, we figure about 1 million acres a year. So even in a good year like last year that we think is good, you know, we only got to about 30-40% of that. So we got a ways to go. So we need to look at our inset management organizations. As I said, we need to ensure, I guess, the best we can that district rangers feel like they're going to be backed, particularly if you have a negative outcome, which you're going to have at times. But the stewardship responsibility that I think a ranger has, that I have, to utilize fire when you have the opportunity is really important. There's a sense of urgency, I think, that many of us feel about reintroducing fire. And if you don't make that decision, if you are skittish or you don't want to just take the chance, then you just really put that burden on the future line officer there when conditions are not as right, and you're gonna very likely result in a more destructive outcome. So.
Okay, thanks everybody for your introductions, and at this point would like to open it up to the audience to throw some questions out about what you think the future might be.
All right, I'll get up here and throw one at you guys. I haven't spent my whole career in Region 5. Not Mike Beasley, I was retired as a FMO in the and I was one of the first modulators in 95 of the Park Service. I can tell you at that time, there was absolutely an electric feeling on those modules that they were a part of something new and special, and it had a cachet, the fire use program. It attracted the kind of firefighters who saw themselves as land managers, as land stewards, amateur ecologists, amateur meteorologists. But unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of firefighters, in the firefighting community and fire managers who just prefer to see themselves as protectors of homes and property, putting the wet stuff on the red stuff. And frankly, the fire chiefs and FMOs in California have so many other things to think about, cost apportionment, preseason, postseason, stakeholder meetings. There's so much going on, so much complexity that a lot of them don't even have frankly, the capacity to embrace a lot of fire ecology and a lot of those concepts. And you had the whole 401, 301, thing go on with the Park Service was trying to get a positive degree requirement for their fire managers. And the Department of Interior basically has kept that. The Forest Service essentially retreated from that because I think they felt like they could not fill those positions with people with degrees. They just couldn't find the people that have the right skill set that can manage complex fire programs and have that positive degree requirement for whatever reason. But I'd like to hear what you guys think about how to bring back the cachet or whatever it was that attracted I think the best and the brightest of the fire management community to that program without being off-putting to all the other perfectly good firefighters and fire managers who are happy just doing their thing, But I was afraid we were really going backwards in California. I did speak to a couple of engine captains in the bar last night from the Santa Fe, and I think that fire use and managed fire, whatever you want to call it, is taking root in many pockets, and it's happening in Region 3 and Region 1. Region 5, I think they're a little bit retrograde. They're flying under the radar there, playing the firefighter safety card, saying, hey, this is suppression, confine, contain, because it triggers a lot of odious air quality rules in California. Essentially, California treats fire use like prescribed fire for smoke management, so they can come in and start calling shots on your incident in that case. But I'd just like to hear how the panel thinks we can really bring back that spirit and sense within even the lowest level firefighter to see themselves as land stewards and land managers and not first responders.
Okay. Well,
I can take a crack at that, Mike, and see what others have to say. I mean, the National Park Service, we went through, and are still going through budgetary declines in wildland fire. We have 6 wildland fire modules right now, 2 in the, geographically 2 in the east, 2 in the Midwest, 2 in the West. And I actually think it'd be a good question to ask them, that they are wildland fire management staff, and they do view themselves like that. And depending upon where you look in the country, they may have more of a fuels treatment bent versus fire response bent, just the nature of the beast where they're located. Turning your question on its head a little bit, I actually think it's more an issue associated with incident management teams, and do they have the understanding of how to use that resource appropriately to achieve the land management objectives that are put in front of them. And I look at S courses, L courses, and this focus on bias for action, and you got to do something that, depending upon your educational background, affects how you do the business that's set in front of you to do. And I think, and I've talked about with others, and I know like they're talking about an NWCG, a little bit less militaristic type training associated with the leadership series and courses. And how do you look at like a 520 or a 620? We really do teach a bias for action, you know, having gone through those courses. That how do you teach, okay, we're gonna wait till it gets to the ridge, and be comfortable with that, and figure out how you use the resources that you either have or that you want to have in place to deal with the fire. It would be a really good question to ask them. Do they feel like they're no longer fire managers, they're firefighters? I think what I hear, they still think of themselves as managers.
Anybody else want to try that one?
So I'm of the vein that, you know, we get accused already in the Forest Service of our fire organization being stovepiped a little bit and very exclusive to the rest of the organization. And so my interests, and this may differ by region, but I would like all of our fire folks to have a solid resource management training as well in their portfolio. And I'm of the bent too that all of our teams should be able to manage a fire regardless of what objectives there are there. So we are actually doing some winter work in our region with our, at least just internal to the Forest Service right now, to look at, again, this form follows function, and whether we're configured correctly with our teams, and I'm talking type 1 through 3, to manage more of these kind of seasons we had just this past year. I don't think we are. Our history was we did have our own fire use team here in the Southwest, and managed a lot of back then fire use events on the Gila and other places that had traditionally had those kind of fires. But since then we had a lull in the action, and you know, there wasn't any interest in kind of maintaining that by the coordinating group, which I was on at the time. So we let the ones that were still interested, that had the passion for it, combine with the northern region for a few years. But so I see this group of people that you know, are analytical and interested in this kind of stuff, passionate about it. And we need to tap into that group and get them on each team, to me, so that each team can be adaptable and a little more nimble. We're just we're too structured right now in our region with so you know, you get a fire and like this Tano fire, and say, well, we need more complexity. It's more complex. It's got a few divisions and some aviation going on and some long-term fire planning, but we sure don't need 60 people. You know, can you come with, you know, can you come with half that crowd? Well, gee, then I got to leave everybody, you know, the other half of the team home. So now I'm thinking myself, and I've talked to a few other people about this, including some of our type 2 ACs, maybe we have 3 type 2 teams in the Southwest. Maybe all of them should be short configuration, because it's easier to add to the roster than to try to tell people you can't come this time. Pretty soon they're not going to want to participate anymore and go somewhere else. So having that kind of dialogue, which is good to me. But.
Okay.
Just one more comment. When I was a Type 2 IC in Rocky Mountain region, we had short teams, and the team was filled out at the time of the assignment by a pool of unit leaders and divisions. And I was asked to take my team to a fire, use fire at the time in Montana. Actually, the other team was up, and they refused the assignment because they didn't want to go short, even shorter than what the team was configured. I think they allowed 5 people to go to the fire. So I took the assignment, and it worked well. It was uncomfortable leaving people behind, but ICS is supposed to be flexible, expand and contract based on the need, and we don't really do that. And we need ICs that are willing to do it, and maybe configuring teams in a shorter number of folks will make that more acceptable to do, because it is tough leaving folks behind. The other thing to consider is a lot of the fire use work that's being done these days is being done by Type 3 organizations, which have become much more skilled, although they're still not Type 2, and they still need to know when to hand it off to a larger or more skilled organization based on complexity. So that's a fine line to consider, but it's the kind of thing that ramp up, ramp down, get a more complex, more skilled organization when you need it, let them go back home when you don't need it. As far as that cache that was talked about, I don't know if we're going to get back to it. I'd like to see it imbued in entire organization, not just a subset of organization, that this is important work to do, and we all need to be a part of it.
Okay, I think we got time for a couple more questions. I saw Blaine.
I'm Blaine Haskell in JFXP, but formerly I was an IMET on the Wildfire system in Valley Road. My question kind of goes along with what you just said, Tim. I've heard some proposals for a new position within the ICS for kind of a leader of the group that would help with the ologists as kind of a cache within an incident management team for the LTANs and the SOCOs and the IMETs and so forth. And I'm wondering if you think that would be very effective if they were already integrated within the team structure, or if you think that that's something that would be counterproductive?
Well, I don't think it'd be counterproductive, but it has not garnered any support from upper leadership. And it's one of those things where if we're trying to make our teams more flexible and smaller so that they can respond to some of these things, adding another position may not be feasible. But again, the folks that in NWCG that entertained that suggestion, I think a strategic section chief, something like that, shot it down. So I don't think it's going anywhere.
I want to follow up too, that I think nimbleness and size of the team is one issue that's maybe going to help address some of what you raised, but it's the leadership, it's what the people on the team believe, you know, their sort of enthusiasm for what it is that they're doing that, in my mind, is more important than the size and the nimbleness and that sort of thing. Because if you think back to that exercise we did yesterday morning, that was a really good exercise, because even though it was just an exercise, it's like 99% of the exercises that we engage in, right? Where you get your firefighter safety and you get your protection objectives and the resource benefit objectives slide and slide and slide. And that's just the way of the world. And so to raise those resource benefit objectives up, it requires leadership of an incident commander of a team that says, I'm going to stand in and say that we have to do these kinds of things. And I think that's what's missing right now, is that we don't have that strong leadership that really believes and says this is what we're going to do. Frankie's asked me before if I think that the resources that we have in fire management now have the skills to do fire use, and I think they do. A lot of the hotshot crews that I work with, Type 2 crews, even engines, I mean, everybody understands resource benefit, but I find that there's this attitude of when resources show up on the fire of, hey, tell us what to do and we'll do it. You know, we can do resource benefit, we can do suppression, let us know. And I still feel like we're kind of at a point with the resource benefit thing where you need to have a fire in your belly to do resource benefit. You can't, if you're just waiting for somebody to say, hey, we're going to go this direction, I think we're going to be stuck in this trap of maybe not getting what we want for a long period of time.
Okay, thanks guys. We have time for one more, maybe two, so I got one in the back.
I guess I grew up in an organization that I had my regular job, I was a forester. I guess I still am. I had had 3 other jobs. 1, I had to do something in fire management. 2, I had to do something in law enforcement. And 3, I had to do something in public affairs. I guess my question, the guys on the panel, are we trying to get back to something like that, where everybody in the organization may be trying to do one thing or something else, and that's their daily job, but they also have the ability and the desire to serve the other masters? Yep.
I'll speak for the Southwest region. Yes, we are trying. It's very difficult. You know, I mentioned that sort of that stovepiping perception. And then our non-fire folks just have a tremendous amount of work on their plate. So when they go to a fire, nobody else does it for them. It's still there when they get back. So we have to figure out that piece of it, figure out how we become more inclusive on the fire organization side so we can, and actually, I want to say this, when we start managing more of these green fires, we are getting tremendous interdisciplinary support for those. And that's been fantastic, because all of a sudden we're starting to introduce a new group of people to fires that didn't have that kind of training, didn't have that kind of education. And I'm hoping for some positive results from that in terms of people that actually want to contribute, you know, to incidents in the future out of that experience. But that's essential, of course. And Kaage got this, I don't have the web link, but they got this great video they did on, you got it? Yeah.
It's on our website.
Okay. It talks about this interdisciplinary effort that goes into successfully managing a wildfire, and it's just great. And it's a pretty short clip. It's really good.
I worked in the eastern part of the United States. I was a ranger in northern Minnesota on the Superior National Forest. Much of the east doesn't have the luxury of the staff that we have out here in the west, and so much more of the folks in the east that aren't full-time fire contribute to that overall effort. And again, as a ranger on the Superior, we manage fire for resource benefit quite a bit, and I'll talk about it in a session this afternoon. But I think we got better results by having everybody contribute to the overall effort, and everybody on the district could articulate what it was we were doing because they contributed. When they don't contribute, oftentimes different messages come from the Forest Service to partners, neighbors, cooperators, etc.
We got about 1 minute left, but we got one short question. Been dying to ask. Okay, one last one.
Yeah, is our training keeping up with these challenges we're all talking about? Do we need to adapt our training to really meet those future needs?
Well,
We need to make less training, and from an external observer, we need to be more efficient with our training for sure. I think that kills us with getting good people in fire, just because the training requirements are so onerous on the front end.
speed to competency.
Yes.
Yeah. I said earlier, I think we need to revisit what we teach in our training that ensures we're getting into the culture we want to address fire as a land management tool. And you hear about it, and they're looking at it. They revamped the National Fire Management Leadership course for agency administrators last year, and it's a much better course than it used to be. And I think it reinforces their role accepting risk and not passing off risk. But it takes time, but we're looking at it, and I hear about it.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our panel members and the audience for all your participation, and I know Bill's going to be also in the later panel this afternoon, but I'd like to have a round of applause. Thank you very much for